Good evening, folks. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Good evening, folks. We're just so thrilled to have you here. Feel free to let us know in the chat where it is that you're joining us from. Where in the world is everybody? This is one of my favorite parts of this experience.
Yeah, one of the perks of Zoom classes.
Right? Oh my goodness, we've already gone all across the country within the first 3 people, right?
Oh, I love this.
So cool. Oh my gosh, New York City's here, and Mexico City's here. Hello, Brooklyn. Hello, Oakland. Hello, New Hampshire, LA.
Oh, Pittsburgh. I was born in Pittsburgh.
Look at that. Oh my gosh. South Dakota, welcome, folks.
I saw one Canadian.
All right, hello, Canadians. Boston saying hello. Oh, somebody who's from Los Angeles but is currently in Tijuana. That's exciting. Feel free to throw in the chat if you're just joining us where it is you're coming in from. We've got Chicago, we've got Connecticut, we've got DC. Hey. Minneapolis, hello. San Francisco, Brooklyn, more Canadians.
Yay.
Texas is
hey, Texas.
Portland, Oregon, Asheville, beautiful town. Seattle, gorgeous there.
2 Seattles in a row. Love to see it. Maybe you'll become friends.
Queens, oh my goodness, so many boroughs represented tonight in New York City.
Yes.
Falls Church, Atlanta, lots of Portland, lots of West Coast here. Digging that West Coast feel.
Olympia? I know that's in Washington.
All right, we've got just a few more people coming in, but Moya's got so much awesome stuff planned that I do not want to waste a second. So let me do my quick intro for you guys so we can get all this set up. So first off, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our course tonight. This is session 1 of fact-based fictional world building with our incredible instructor, Moya McTeer, with one of Atlas Obscura's new courses. My name is Ethan. I'm going to be your moderator this evening. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm just here to welcome you and help you guys out to make sure that this goes well. So I've been lucky to be working with Atlas Obscura since the beginning of this year, and at AO, our mission has always been to inspire wonder and curiosity about the incredible world that we all share. And now, more than ever, there's a need for us all to stay connected, not only to that incredible sense of wonder, but almost more importantly, to each other. So I really do want to thank you for joining us as we jump into this transition together from real-time experiential content to this virtual world. So we encourage you to follow along and share any of your experiences with the hashtag AO experiences, and to make sure you're checking out atlasobscura.com for more courses and shows, and of course the Atlas, which is just the greatest way to explore while we're all indoors. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. We're using Zoom. I'm sure we all know Zoom very well, but I do like to remind everybody that this Zoom room and this Zoom link that you followed tonight will be the same one for every session that you take with this course. So you just have to click that same link every single time. If you're not already in speaker view, where you're just seeing a big screen share nice and big, or potentially my face nice and big, go ahead and adjust that in our upper right-hand corner of the screen under the views link, which will allow you to head over into speaker view. We do record all of our sessions in speaker view for internal purposes. If you'd rather not be recorded, you can go ahead and turn off your video, although we always enjoy seeing your faces. The recordings are going to be shared with participants in the days following each session, and will be protected with a temporary password. So if you miss one, you'll be able to check it out for up to a week after those sessions are live. If anybody has any questions or comments during the course, you are more than welcome to put them in the chat. You can just use the little chat bubble at the bottom of the screen. Moya is going to be monitoring it, as will I. If you find the chat distracting, just go ahead and pop out that window and move it to the side. It'll just go away. And then most importantly, let's all be cool, okay? I don't anticipate anybody being disrespectful in this space, but I do want to just note that anyone who is being disrespectful or disruptive in any way may be removed from our course without notice. And finally, Moya has created a Google Classroom for us all to connect in when we are not here today. I'm going to drop that into our chat just to make sure that everybody has it, and I will drop it throughout. Please feel free to sign up for that at your leisure. I gather you've already included some discussion questions. Yes, Moya?
They're scheduled to send after this first lecture.
Fabulous. So get on in there. It requires a Google account or some sort of email or password. If you've got one email that's not working, I encourage you to just try another one. And if you've got any problems after you've tried that second one, you can always reach out to us on the experience team at experiences@atlasobscura.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, I have been talking for way too long because we've got way too much goodness coming tonight. I am so excited to be joining all of you for our first class, fact-based fictional world building with our incredible instructor who I have heard literally amazing things about as long as I've been working at AO, Moya McTeer. Moya, please take it away.
Oh, Ethan, that's the nicest introduction anyone has ever given me. Thank you. My name's Moya McTeer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm so excited that you're all joining me for the first week of fact-based fictional world building. I'm so excited to share my process and my steps with you. But before I get to all of that, I know that so many of us are working on Zoom and we're socializing on Zoom, and now you're taking this class on Zoom. So I know that if we're always on the same product, it can feel difficult to distinguish between them. So I wanted to create just a small little ritual that I'll do every week. So I'm going to light a candle, this candle behind me. I know you can't smell it, but it smells delicious. It's like apple scented, which is great for harvest season. So as long as this candle is lit, we will be in world building class. This isn't real wood. It's not that flammable. I hope this doesn't scare any of you, but it's totally safe. I've tried it before. Yeah, so as long as this candle is lit, we are in world building class, and that's how hopefully we can separate our work from our lives. Awesome. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I see that some of you are saying it's a little hard to hear me. I will try to speak up, but maybe turn up your volume just in case. Let's get to the class. Oh, if only things would work. All right, so Ethan introduced me, but I want to give a little bit more about my background so that you know, like, why is this chick teaching this class? Well, I am an astrophysicist and a folklorist. I did my undergrad at Harvard, where I studied both astrophysics and folklore and mythology, and now I'm in my 5th year getting a PhD in astronomy at Columbia University in New York City. I specialize in exoplanet habitability. Exoplanets are planets outside of our solar system, and in building fictional worlds. So I like to say that all of my specialties together just make me, you know, a huge nerd when it comes to imagining alien worlds and other planets and trying to figure out what life would be like there. I have a bunch of experience that makes me a good instructor for this course, so you're in good hands. I wrote a sci-fi novel in college. It was my first experience with building my own fictional world that actually went anywhere. I tried to design a bunch when I was in middle school, but I don't know of any middle schooler who's actually published a book. So that didn't work out. I've been teaching world building workshops around the world for years to a variety of audiences, anyone from 6-year-olds up to very grizzled consultants in New York City who didn't know why they were in that room when I started the workshop, but at the end they were very happy that they were there. Oh no. Okay. And I host a podcast called Exolore, which is all about fact-based fictional world building. I'm not going to tell you to listen to the podcast. If you want to, and if you want to check it out, go ahead. In the show, I interview different world builders, so writers, game designers. I just this morning interviewed someone who organizes auctions, which is a cool take on world building. I also build my own worlds with help from expert guests, and I review other fictional worlds that people have built. So all of that is what makes me a good person to teach this course, and I'm going to try and take some of that knowledge and experience and impart it onto you so that you can build your own fictional worlds, whether you have a story in mind or you just want to live in a new place for a little bit. It's totally up to you. From this course, you can expect a lot of really practical content. I'm not going to teach you how to write. I'm not going to teach you how to develop characters or plot. This is all about world building. And in hosting my podcast, I've interviewed a lot of other world builders. And one thing that most of us agree on is that to build a fictional world, you really have to understand how our own real world works. So in this course, over the next 7 weeks from now, I'm going to be giving you fundamental truths, these facts, these fundamental concepts that people in different academic disciplines have found to be true. And you'll be able to use those, apply them to your worlds, and manipulate them in fun and exciting ways to make your worlds feel more real. I also am going to have some awesome guest lecturers who are leaders in their fields. In this course, we're going to be talking about biology and the history of science and government structures. And I am an expert in many things, but I am not an expert in those. So I brought in people who knew a lot more than I do about those fields so that together we can steal their knowledge. Ethan mentioned the Google Classroom. I'll be posting suggested readings, discussion questions. I'll even provide creative prompts. And those prompts are all going to be in service of building a fictional world. So at the end of all of the content lectures, so after this week, at the end of all of the lectures, I will build a little bit of a world depending on what the topic of the lecture was. So next week's lecture, for example, is astronomy. And I will do a little bit of the astronomy world building, and then I'll ask you to add to it. Because world building is a really big process. It's a big project. It can take a long time. So if we all do it together, then we'll create a world that feels more rich and has more in it. Just so you know, we started a little bit after because this was the first class and we wanted people to be able to come in and hear an introduction. But from now on, class will start right at 8 p.m. so that I can get through all of the slides because I'm a little talkative. So I'll need that full hour. All right. Let's get started with the lecture. Introduction's over.
There's no limit to what you'll find. These are your worlds. So come on, dive deeper into the universes you love, wherever and whenever you want them.
That's an ad for Disney Plus. I am not, a paid supporter of Disney Plus or anything, but I did want to use that video as a reminder that so many of our favorite stories, the stories that we use to comfort ourselves or to provoke thoughts and discussion, so many of them are set in fictional worlds. So I want to start by asking you what your favorite fictional worlds are, or if you have a hard time picking a favorite, what are some ones that you really like, that you know really well? Put it in the chat, and then I can read some of them out. Discworld, yeah, that's a good one. Narnia, Middle-earth, gotta love it. I see American Gods in there, Dune, Golden Compass. I love it. So mine are Narnia. I was a huge Buffy nerd when I was in high school and still. Earthsea, Wakanda. Yes, love it. So we are able to list so many fictional worlds because people have been creating them for centuries. Human beings have been telling stories for, tens of thousands of years. We've been writing them down. We've been passing them on to our descendants. Stories are an integral part of the human experience. And building fictional worlds is something that only humans can do. Our brains are unique among animals here on Earth in that we can actually run these cool mental simulations to figure out what would happen in an alternate scenario. What would another world actually be like? So this is one of the reasons I love fictional world building so much. And the way that I build fictional worlds is based on not just science, but facts. So bringing in everything from the humanities. But let's talk a little bit about definitions. Oh, I see some of you are still writing your favorite fictional worlds. That's awesome. The Dark Crystal. Yes. So throughout this course, you're going to hear me say the term speculative fiction or spec-fic a lot. And speculative fiction is an umbrella term. Underneath that, there's sci-fi, there's fantasy, there's historical fantasy, urban fantasy, historical fiction. There are so many genres under spec-fic, but it's a genre that includes elements that don't exist in the real world. And sometimes those elements are things like magic or advanced technology. And sometimes that element is that you're literally on a different planet, like in Avatar with Pandora. That was a different planet. So speculative fiction is a big umbrella term. That the thing that binds speculative fiction together is that it requires fictional world building. World building is exactly what it sounds like. It's the process of constructing a fictional world or universe. Or a smaller version of world building is intentionally crafting an atmosphere. So if you've ever had a date night and you lit some nice candles and you put some nice music on, you were setting the mood, right? Well, that's a type of world building. Anytime you manipulate your environment or create an entirely new one, that's world building. One of my favorite authors is Neil Gaiman. He once called world building the joy of getting to play God. I like to tack on to the end of that you have none of the responsibility. So world building is really fun. And when I say world, I can mean planet. Often when I do my own world building exercises, I start from scratch with a totally new planet that is in some way different than Earth. But you can also do small world building. This book right here, The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, is set in a world that has a map, actually. So I'll show you the map. So here on the map, you can see that the world is actually pretty small. It's set on this little archipelago of islands, and we know that there's more world out there, but the characters haven't explored it yet. So to the characters in the story, this is their entire world. So when I say world building, you don't have to imagine a whole new universe, although you can, and sometimes it's really fun to do that. World building can be as small as an island or as large as a galaxy. I love that. Thank you, Isaac. One of the biggest misconceptions of world building is that it's used for one thing, and that one thing is setting the scene in a story. But world building is actually a multi-purpose tool. So if you have a story in mind, if you're taking this class because you want to start or finish a creative project that tells a story, here's what world building can do for you. It's not just about creating a setting for your story, not at all. World building can be used to drive plot and motivate characters. If you have read N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy, for example, there's a lot of world building that goes into exactly how the different seasons come to pass. And that drives the plot. It's the entire plot of the book, is the fact that this world is in some way different than ours in a very key and consequential way. So it can do those things. It can keep audiences engaged by making the story feel more immersive. I don't know if you've ever had that experience of when you're reading a book or watching a TV show or something and you just can't get into it. If the story isn't immersive, it's probably because the world doesn't feel like something that you can actually get caught in. So building a world that feels real to your audience is an important part of making sure they actually get to the end of your story. Yeah, Jemison did just win the MacArthur Grant. It was such good news. If you don't have a story in mind, but you still want to do world building, that's totally okay too, because even just as a personal exercise, world building flexes your interdisciplinary thinking muscles. Your brain is a muscle, and by doing world building, you're thinking about astronomy and biology and economics and botany. You're thinking about all of these things at the same time. Probably not at the same exact time, but you're creating those connections in your brain between different parts of your brain, and that actually helps your brain become healthier and stronger. It also promotes understanding and tolerance of different life forms and cultures. A lot of those world building workshops that I've taught in the past have been to children from other cultures so that they can learn that behavior, culture really is just a matter of circumstance, that if you were born in a different place, you would also dress like them, talk like them, eat like them. And so I use world building to try and promote tolerance. And world building is useful in unexpected industries. I told you earlier that I just finished interviewing someone who organizes auctions, but any type of event organizing uses world building. Interior design, actually crafting a space to create the desired effect, whether you want it to be cozy or modern or industrial or whatever. Interior designers world build all the time. and policy creation or reform. When Congress gets together and they're debating different laws, then they have to have a case for how this law will actually affect people's lives. So they have to imagine, if this law gets passed or if this policy is put in place, how will people's lives change? And that's a type of world building, doing that mental simulation to figure out what would be different under different conditions. Product development, yeah, for sure. So many different use cases for world building. All right, now let's get to the good part, the steps of fact-based world building. So when I start a world building project, I always answer the same questions and in the same order to start with. And then there's a chaotic bit that happens after that. But the first chunk of my world building exercise is actually pretty formulaic. So I answer these questions in this order. First, figure out what makes your world different. Maybe your world orbits, your world is a planet, trying to distinguish between those. Maybe your world is a planet that orbits multiple stars, like Tatooine in Star Wars. Or maybe it's a world where they have stoplights and everything is exactly the same, but for stoplights, green means stop and red means go. And so your difference can be big or small. Second, try to figure out how your world got that way. This isn't always relevant if you're telling a story. Sometimes you just want to start from the point of, well, this is how it is. It doesn't matter how it got this way. Let's talk about what's going to happen now. And sometimes your whole story is about how it got that way. I'm going to pick on N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy again. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but a huge part of the trilogy, of the story, is explaining how the world got the way it is. Next, try to think about, don't try, do, think about what the geology, the climate, the environment, the physical setting of your world is. And that will actually directly affect the next thing that you have to think about, which is biology. So biology depends a lot on random chance. We're going to talk about that in the biology lecture, but it also depends directly on your environment. If you live on a planet that has a lot of oxygen in its atmosphere, then the life forms on that atmosphere or on that planet, many of them will probably use oxygen in some way or another. So your environment is really important to get set at the beginning. After you do biology, you can start talking about culture, and that's the biggest part of world building. I think that like half of world building is figuring out the culture, and then the rest, the other 50%, is answering these other 4 questions. Because culture depends on biology, it depends on environment. Think about the types of food that, my earring just totally fell out. I'm just gonna take the other one out too. Think about the types of foods that people eat in different cultures. The cuisines that people have depend on the foods, the plants, the animals, the spices that they had available to them. And so, all of these, biology, geology, climate, that all determines culture. Once you answer those questions, once you climb those steps, you've created a world. That doesn't mean that that's the final version of your world. You can go back to previous steps, right? Because our biology has affected our environment, and our culture has affected our environment, which has in turn affected our biology. Things like using fossil fuels has added pollution to the environment. That is giving us more lung disease as a species. So there is a cycle. And I encourage you to go back multiple times once you reach the top of this, just to try and add more depth and more complexity. Those top 4 questions, they're going to be covered in future lessons. We're going to talk about all of the, not all, because we only have 8 weeks, but we're going to talk about a lot of the different academic disciplines that touch on these things. We'll have a lesson on geology and climate. We'll have lessons on folklore, building a religion, and building government structures. So we'll have those classes. But this lesson is focused on that first question. What makes your world different? So there are a few ways that you can choose how to build your world. So how do you figure out what kind of world you want to build? This list isn't exhaustive, but this is And it's also not mutually exclusive. Some of them overlap, but this is the list I came up with. So your first option is to build a world from scratch. This is what I typically do. So create a physical world and then construct everything from the beginning. Almost like you're writing your own Bible for this world. Like in the beginning, what does that look like for this world? And then you build it from scratch. This is really good if you don't have a story in mind already, if you just want to start building a world, and oftentimes the story will come later. Or if the story doesn't come, you can just go hang out in this world sometimes. I actually do that a lot with some of the nicer, more utopia-like worlds that I've built. Another way that you can figure out what kind of world you want to build is to watch, I call it watching the ripples. So you start with something that is very similar to Earth, except it has one big change, usually a historical event or a new element. N.K. Jemisin, I bring her up a lot because she's just so good at world building and so relevant for a lot of different examples. But she did an interview with Ezra Klein a year or two ago, and she calls this the X factor. You know, what is that one change that you make? I think in her example, it's that, you know, the people have tails, like we never lost our prehensile tails, and that's actually pretty cool. But you make that one change in Earth and you see how it affects everything else. And that's actually really nice because you don't have to go back and try to figure out, you know, what is this world made of? What's its atmosphere like? What are its weather patterns? You know, you're starting with Earth, it has humans, and then just this one little thing is different. So that's a totally valid way to build a world. The next way is to tailor your world to a character or a story that you already have in mind. I don't have examples of this, like books or TVs that have done this because I haven't talked to their creators, but if you want to write a story about a young girl, for example, who saved the world, then you know that you're not creating a utopia. You're probably creating a world where there is one big evil or one big issue or one big catastrophic event. So you can create a world that fits a character or a story. Or you can create a world to make a point. There's a genre of fiction called climate fiction that's been getting pretty popular in the last decade or so as people start thinking more and more about the climate crisis. And so you can create a world that talks about climate change or reproductive justice or racial justice. You can use stories to get people thinking and talking about points that you don't think they're talking about enough. Like I said, these aren't mutually exclusive. You can jumble them all up. You can use them all at the same time. Or maybe you have another suggestion. If you can think of another way to, you know, start with your world building, put it in the chat. I love hearing other people's suggestions for this. Oh, Handmaid's Tale is a really nice one for making a point. Yeah, Gilead is a terrible place, but it's one that Margaret Atwood made to talk about reproductive justice. Exactly, yeah, and gender rights. All right, now for an example. I told you I do most of my world building from scratch. Native Hordes is the sci-fi novel that I wrote in college. So the world itself, I wanted to make it as scientifically accurate as possible. It was actually set on a real exoplanet that I studied, I did research on it in college. And so I knew some things right off the bat. I knew that this planet orbited a small, cool, magnetically active star called an M-dwarf star. I'm going to talk a little bit more about M-dwarfs in next week's astronomy lecture. But I started from that. And actually, when astronomers do research on exoplanets, we don't know much more than that. We almost always know what type of star it orbits, if it orbits a star, because not all planets do. We know what type of star it orbits, and maybe we know how big or how massive it is. So I wasn't starting with much information. But from there, just from the fact that their star is really magnetically active, I figured that the people there, who I called Malians, evolved underwater, so they spent much of their evolutionary history underwater to avoid radiation from stellar flares. Another thing I know about M dwarfs is that they get less magnetically active over time. So over time, the surface becomes safer for Malians. So they came out of the water, but they still didn't like the brightness, so they went back underground, and now they live in this underground society. Their biology, because they spent so much of their time underwater, was inspired by fish. They had scales, they had webs between their fingers and toes. All of them were hermaphroditic because so many marine species, especially fish, are hermaphrodites. They have both male and female reproductive organs. And this created some really interesting gender and family dynamics. So for example, a family on this world that I built wasn't like a mom, a dad, and a kid. Because they were hermaphrodites, they could choose whether they wanted to lay an egg or fertilize an egg. And so they had these really sacred spots in the middle of their villages, in the middle of their caves, because they're underground, where people could choose to lay eggs, and then other people could choose to fertilize them. And then, because no one knew which baby belonged to which parents, it was like it takes a village to raise a kid type of situation, where everyone just pitched in to raise all of the offspring. Another thing that happened on this planet, the part of the culture, was that the class hierarchy valued intelligence, and they really did not value creativity. So scientists were at the top of this society, and artists and creatives were at the bottom. Left Hand of Darkness. Rogue planets. Thank you, Ashley Waldron. Yeah, rogue planets are planets that don't orbit stars. So that was my first attempt at building a fictional world from start to finish. Now I want to give you the opportunity to practice your own world building, but this is going to be a mini world building session. I don't expect you to build an entire world right now. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You can't build a world in 5 minutes. And so please don't get frustrated if you don't get through all of the questions, because I'm intentionally giving you only a little bit of time. So I am going to ask you to build a world that has clouds so thick that they block out most of the light from outside the atmosphere. So what I'd like you to do is maybe come up with an explanation for how it got that way. Think about what the physical environment is. Think about how the environment affects biology on this world. What would the people on the world look like if they didn't have a sun, right? Because or if they couldn't see sunlight because the clouds are so thick. And then how does it affect culture, right? So I'm gonna let you brainstorm for 5 minutes. While you're doing this, take note of any obstacles you run into. Take note of anything you need to know for your world building, but you don't know it yet. So I'm gonna give you 5 minutes. I'm timing it. Feel free to turn off your video or whatever. I'll call you back when you have a minute left. Your time starts now. I feel like I should play music. Maybe I'll do that next time. I don't want to. Choosing a playlist is a lot of pressure, so I'm not going to do that live. Okay, Virginia wants music. I'm going to put on a mellow cello playlist. I don't know why that stopped. You have about a minute left, FYI, and I'm loving the chat. All right, let's get back to it. I love that everyone was writing down their thoughts in the chat and actually interacting with each other. That's exactly what I want from this class. I also want to point out someone brought up Zeus smoking, and I love that because I didn't make it clear enough at the beginning that this class isn't just about sci-fi. I also want to give you the tools to create fantasy worlds. And so even though this class is called facts-based fictional world building, magic operates based on a set of rules. At least a good magic system does. And so if you can use the facts that you learn in this class to help you inform the rules, the laws that your fantasy world follows. All right, moving on a little bit after that practice, I'm glad to see that people are still talking about it in the chat. And I'll also post a discussion question in the Google Classroom later so that you can write down your answers there too, and we can continue this conversation. But when you're doing world building, keep in mind that consistency is key. My biggest pet peeve when I'm reading or when I'm watching TV is when someone has established rules at the beginning and then they break them later on. Also, sometimes rules are meant to be broken. But I'm thinking of this Netflix show that I watched recently. There was something about a king, but I remember they established a world where magic was passed down through family. So to have magical abilities, you have to be related to someone who has magical abilities. And then later on in the show, they revealed that someone had magical abilities, but we didn't see anyone in their family who had powers. And so remember that consistency is key. To keep yourself consistent, write everything down. I actually have, where is it? Here it is. I have my own little world building notebook. So right now I'm working on a book, and I keep my notes. I keep my notes in this book. I answer all of my questions in this little notebook it's small enough that I can keep it with me. Next, remember that world building can be an endless process. That's part of the reason I wanted to give you so little time before. So world building can feel like it takes forever, and that's because there's always more to do. One of my favorite world building analogies is that it's kind of like an iceberg. So 90% or like 80% of the world building work you do is underneath the water level. It's the part of the iceberg that you can't see. And then that top 10 or 20%, that's the part that makes it into your story. But your readers can tell if that other 80% isn't there. They can tell if you haven't done the work to figure out what your entire world looks like, or at least what your entire relevant world looks like. And that's my tip. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed by world building, then just limit it to the stuff that's relevant to your story. If you're thinking of a story where it's a typical fantasy world and they have their own separate continents, if you have a character in mind, just focus on the continent that the character lives on. And then if that character, or if that continent interacts with another continent, then yeah, build that out too. But limit your scope to what's relevant to your story. And then I touched on this before, but you really have to know your own world. You have to know what makes it feel real and how everything is connected before you can build a fictional world. So this class is going to give you the facts that you need. But that second part, how everything is connected, that comes with practice. That comes with actually going out into the world and making note or taking note of all of the ways that different things connect. It means watching documentaries and then figuring out how something you learned in the first documentary you watched explains something that you're seeing in the second documentary you watched. Being a world builder means understanding that everything influences everything else. And if you can gain that skill, then that's what's going to make you a great world builder. And then, world building is science plus imagination. That's why I bring in facts. I can't teach you imagination though. That's something that you have to work on. And it's something that everyone has to work on. It's not an innate ability. Some people find creativity and imagination easier than others, but it is something that everyone has to work on. So throughout this course, in the Google Classroom, when I give you those creative prompts, that step, those assignments are meant to help you gain the skill of figuring out how things are connected, and flexing and strengthening your imagination and creativity muscles. So next time, we're going to cover the basics of astronomy, because if you're building a world from scratch, then you literally have to start with how the world was built, how the world formed. So we're going to talk about cool things like what are the different types of stars that your planet can orbit, or what are the different, I call them dials. What are the dials that you can manipulate to create differences in your world? And some of this isn't going to be relevant to all of you, right? This is super relevant if you're building from scratch. But even if you're starting with Earth, there are still some relevances, or if you're starting with something that's very similar to Earth. I recently did a podcast interview with an author who she wrote a fantasy book, but she realized after she published it that she talked about constellations in the book, but never did the work of figuring out if the constellations in her book were the same as the constellations that we see out here in the real world. So it might seem like it's not relevant to you, but learning more about astronomy can only help you with your world building. And we'll also start to build our world next week. So now I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can hopefully look at some of your faces. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. So you can either write them in the chat, or I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so we'll stick to the chat, I think, for questions. Cool. So first off, that was phenomenal. Thank you so much. And also, like, crew, team, the chat was so cool. So thank you so much for all that creativity. I moderate a lot of these things, and I've never seen it get so collaborative in there before. So thank you. I had a question that came up really early that I just think is sort of interesting, and I want you to talk about a little bit. I apologize, I can't remember who asked this question, but world building as one word. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Is it often done as one word? Is it two words? Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. That is the bane of my existence, because I think it is supposed to be two words, and I have just forced all of my different devices to stop auto-correcting it to two different words, because I think that I use this process, I use this word enough as a standalone thing that I think it makes more sense to squish it into one word.
Awesome. Trevor has a really good question here. For those of us who don't know experts on topics, what are some resources that you think you can go to get discussion on things that you might want more information on?
Really great question. There are places on the interwebs. So Stack Overflow and Reddit and a bunch of different websites have topic-specific forums. So I know that there's like a physics stack exchange for example. There's also Quora, right? These are places where a lot of people have asked the questions that you have before, and then smart people have gone and answered them. You can also reach out to scientists on social media. People reach out to me and ask me space questions on Twitter all the time. And scientists, we're busy and some of us are curmudgeonly, but we are also really excited about sharing our work. So if you reach out to a scientist, there's a good chance that if they're not a jerk, they will respond to your question.
Would it be, a couple people are asking for these resources. Is it possible for you to list a couple of those in maybe Google Classroom so that we've got a permanent area for that?
Yeah, I'll absolutely do that.
Awesome. And then we did have a request earlier for that iceberg graphic that you showed, the cultural iceberg graphic. I think people were really inspired by that one. Can you tell us maybe more about that?
I can, yeah. It's going to come up a lot in this class. The cultural iceberg, I can't remember who came up with the idea, but it's cited on the actual image. And it's this idea that there are parts of culture that are really easy to see. So imagine you get on a plane and you step off of it in a totally foreign country. There are some things that you'll see right away. You'll notice the language, you'll notice the clothes. If you spend any amount of time there, you'll notice the food. So those parts of culture are really easy to observe, but there's a lot under the surface that you can't see right away. Things like, what's their sense of humor like? How do they feel about how physically close you get, what's considered rude and what's considered polite. And so the cultural iceberg, I think, gives a lot of really great examples of different things in those categories.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. A couple people are asking for your Twitter. Can you remind us what your Twitter is?
Yeah, it's GoAstroMo. It's on the bottom of all my slides. I'm also going to send out the slides. I'll put a PDF of the slides in the Google Classroom. I don't think there are any in this lecture, but in future lectures, there will be links to relevant articles and resources. So I'll send you the PDF.
Awesome. We've got so many great questions coming in. I want to make sure that we're able to get through a few more of them. A couple people are really interested in the idea of language creation. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I really wish I had a whole lecture devoted to linguistics, but it didn't make the cut. So I will say that the trap, one thing that I often see going wrong when it comes to languages is people using euphemisms that are Earth-centric, or even more specifically like US-centric. So things like it's raining cats and dogs, or dial the phone, or roll down the window. Those are idioms and euphemisms that have context. You need the context, the cultural context, to make sense of them. And I often see people using idioms and euphemisms like that in their stories on a totally different world. Like, you can't say roll down the window or dial a phone in a world that never had rotary phones. It just doesn't make sense. So be careful of that. Some people don't love when fictional characters use English, but like ultimately, many of us are probably going to be writing or creating for an English-speaking audience, or you can translate your work. But I mean, you can make up a totally new language like Tolkien did, but that's tricky, and I don't think people will require it of you. But if you want to, like, go for it. And if any of you are super interested in creating your own language, I've never done that, but I would happily talk to you about it and just like brainstorm ideas.
Amazing. So there's a great question, sort of a longer question here from Alexis, which is, do you think that that another category of world is a world that is ours, but with some sort of secret element or society, truth, or rule that most people don't know about? It sounds like there might be is that the sort of the same category as our world, but with sort of one change? You may be settling a debate for some roommates here.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, I think that is absolutely a valid form of world building. And I wouldn't consider it our world, but with a change, I would consider it small world building, like using world building to really focus, narrow down on one individual's or like a small group of people's worldview.
Very cool. Let's see here. We got a request for the Google, the iceberg graphic in the classroom. I'll follow up with you with the things that people were asking for resource-wise, cool, so that you can put those in the classroom. Great. Lots of people talking about idioms and how that works. You've got some astronomy and astrobiology friends. Do they mind if you reach out to them on Twitter? Sorry, they would like to reach out to you on Twitter.
Yes, please do.
Okay,
Go
fantastic.
Astromo.
Awesome. People are talking about the organization of world building, and what are some other tools that you use to organize sort of the mess that can be world building? It looks like Dan currently has a massive Excel spreadsheet. What other tips and tricks do you have for us?
Well, I've never tried an Excel spreadsheet, but for me, it's really just writing. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got for this, so I'm stealing from someone else, Allison Lors, who's she's the narrative design lead at Wizards of the Coast for their digital games. So she knows her stuff. But she recommended looking at Wikipedia articles for countries, because most of them are organized in the same way. They'll talk about the geological history of the country and the language and the food and a bunch of different cultural aspects. But if you are building a new place, I'd say follow that structure. And fill it in as you make your decisions.
Very cool. Very cool. Can you talk to us? Oh dear, this is the chat is going crazy, and I love it. This is my favorite part of all of this. There was one that I had seen that was sort of interesting. About a lot of people are talking about maps. Can you talk to us a little bit about building maps or tips that you have when you're thinking about a visual representation of these worlds?
Yes. The quickest tip I have for you is that if you have dice or marbles, dice are probably better because they have flat sides. My favorite way to make a fictional map is to assign the different colored die to different things that would go on a map. So like green die mean forests, green dice mean forests, or a blue die would mean water or a lake. And so I take a bunch of different colored dice and I throw them on a piece of paper and I trace their outline. And then where all of the green ones are, I put a forest. And where all of the brown ones are, I make those continents, depending on how big I want the scope of the world to be. And so that's my favorite map making trick. In the geology lecture, we're going to talk a lot more about plate tectonics and how different continents can actually pull apart or interact with each other. So I think that will be pretty relevant to anyone who's super into making maps.
I'm seeing a number of people mentioning that that's a technique that sounds very common for people who do D&D work. So that's really cool, a neat way to kind of cross over on those two worlds. We've got just a few more minutes. If you've got more questions, feel free to keep them coming into the chat. Can you maybe give us a preview about what we might be able to expect next week?
Yes. So we're going to talk about, I think of them as dials. We're going to talk about the different dials that you can turn to change your stellar system, your system of planets and a star. So we'll talk about the different types of stars that there are. We'll talk about how the tilt of your planet affects things like seasons and weather on your planet. We're going to talk about whether or not you need a moon. What does a moon do? Because some people think that our moon is actually pretty responsible for Earth being habitable in the first place. And I think I have like 10 different dials like that. So that's what we can expect from next week. And then we will actually start to build our world from scratch. So I will, maybe I'll run a poll. I haven't totally decided yet, but we're gonna figure out what are the building blocks of our world next week.
Oh, wow. I feel very excited. I've got, I think, probably time for maybe one more question, but I do have a really interesting one thinking about this sort of science fiction. Michael is asking, for a science fiction setting, is it a good idea to start with a planet or with a star map so that you know how your world is affected by its neighborhood? Sort of, do you have recommendations or thoughts on that?
This is Michael. Michael said that?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Yeah. So next week, one of the dials is your place in the galaxy. So we are going to talk a little bit about what we astronomers call it our solar neighborhood, like the neighborhood that our sun is in. So we are going to talk about how your star's environment affects your planet too. It has to do with things like, well, what types of constellations can you see? How fast are you moving around the galaxy? And does that do anything for you? We're going to get into that.
So cool. All right, well, we've just got a few more minutes here. So I want to just thank everyone and remind everyone that there's great discussion happening here, great resource sharing, all of that. Let's continue that on the Google Classroom. For those of you who may have joined a little bit late, I'm going to drop that link once again right down here in the chat. So please feel free, hop over, make your account, get in there, because I can already tell that there is great stuff happening. I'm going to follow up with Moya about some of the requests that we had around resources and images so that they can get in there. And you've already programmed in some questions. Yes, you've already got some prompts. Fabulous. Yes. Oh my goodness. So cool. With that, I'm going to say thank you because we are just about at time. Just remember, we are right back here, same time, same place. And if you are looking for anything else to do in your spare time, please check out atlasobscura.com, which has got information on more courses, experiences, and of course the Atlas itself, which is just a great way to go and explore in the world while we're all sitting at home. I'm thrilled for next week. I think I speak for just about everybody here based on what I'm seeing in the chat. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next Tuesday.
Yeah, we'll see you next Tuesday at 8 p.m. sharp.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, friend.